What do you think of the move we just seen that Joe Rogan made by going to Spotify? I mean, at first we heard the headlines of the cash that was involved, the $100 million deal. But then when you dug deeper, you could hear that one of the reasons was that he felt he was being censored on YouTube. He specifically called out YouTube and Twitter in the Barry Weiss article in the New York Times. And, we know he stopped live streaming a year ago. That was curious to me. And now he's potentially going to Spotify where they're going to not have that censorship. Is there a capitalistic way around this where new platforms will come up? Or is YouTube getting the message? Or is it such a big monopoly that we're not convinced that'll happen?
So the answer is both. We have to look for external solutions. I'm a huge Joe Rogan fan. I don't see eye to eye on him with a lot of different things, especially his drug usage. Happy to talk to him about that. But I think he's brilliant. I think he's one of the best communicators, best interviewers of our time. He has a way about him that makes it feel as if you're eavesdropping in on a private conversation. And I also just love the over-masculinity of his entire show, that I'm going to own the fact that I am an alpha male, and if you don't like it, don't watch it. I'm actually in the minority opinion. I think that he's undervalued in that deal. I think he's worth way more than $100 million. I think Spotify got the better deal out of it. If it's true that he's going to just put all of his content exclusively on Spotify, including streaming rights, I mean, you look at an average Rogan video, it'll get 3 to 4 million YouTube views, which is extraordinary. You go back in the archives with Elon Musk, his Elon Musk interview just on his channel, not even the reposting of it, got 38 million views on YouTube. I mean, these are astronomical numbers, not to mention he's getting 150 million downloads a month on Apple Podcasts. So I would actually think $100 million is lowballing. Now, I guess that's $100 million for the rights of it. He's still going to get ad revenue and royalties, so maybe there's something baked into it. But good for him. I think it was less about the money in the mind of Joe Rogan and more about he actually has internalized a lot of his guests coming on his show that have said that, Joe, you realize that the more you use these platforms, the more you're giving them fodder to be able to censor all of these dissident voices that you're highlighting. And I think Joe Rogan made a very philosophical and moral and courageous stand by saying, you know what, why don't I go to an external platform that might shake this up a little bit? And good for him, because in his conversation, very informal with, I think it was Barry Weiss that wrote the New York Times opinion, who's one of the very few thoughtful people at the New York Times. She's terrific. I don't agree with her on everything, but she's a very good writer. She had an exclusive interview with him. It was a very long article in the Times where Rogan basically said, look, it's about time they stop censoring us. And I'm looking forward to now this kind of shaking up the status quo. Now, whether or not YouTube realizes this or they just think they're so big and so monolithic they can't be disrupted remains to be seen. But I think we have to take it from a couple different angles. And again, I don't think the monopoly angle is going to work, and they know that. Our monopoly laws, the Sherman Antitrust Act was written, I think, in 1907 for the very specific purpose of breaking up Standard Oil and Andrew Carnegie had a completely different type of monopoly that was trying to vertically monopolize and trying to allegedly exploit consumers. That's not what they're doing. They're instead using the quote-unquote free usage model where you're actually the product. You're not the user, you're the product. They're selling you to the company. They're selling your consumer purchasing. They're selling your search history. You're not the user. You've become the thing that's actually on the assembly line for these tech companies, which is what is so different. And so I think if we're going to create new legislation, I'm careful to take the recommendations of the tech companies. Let me say this. These tech companies come to DC. They hire the best lobbyists on the planet, and they say, oh, regulate us. Bad idea. If a company ever tells you to regulate them, they're writing the regulation that's going to benefit them and prevent a Spotify from ever being a competitive YouTube. So Spotify, they gained $1.3 billion in market value and market cap once they signed Joe Rogan. Awesome. Good for them. That shows that the market realizes the significance. So they got 13 times the market cap value based on just the signing equivalent of what they got from Rogan. So again, that proves the point that Spotify got the better deal in this whole Rogan thing, at least on the monetary side of it. But YouTube is going to come under a lot of fire legislatively if they continue on this path. And so I think the best way to go about this is go to the point of regulation that YouTube disagrees with most, platform access. Maybe there's something to be said that you as a human being get a social security number equivalent to the Social Security Administration, and you're not allowed to be de-affiliated from that platform equivalent to your social security number. Maybe that's a solution. Now, there's a counter argument to be said, but what if they say the most vile, racist, horrible, awful things in society? Well, we allow them to protest outside of the Capitol, right? We allow those awful, horrible people to have a platform outside of the Capitol. And we've actually done a good job of saying more speech is the better solution to that. Now, I'm not saying this is a perfect solution, because there is something to be said that vile, awful, horrible people should be given the capacity to be cross-examined. And sometimes in a social media setting, you can't be cross-examined. But I'm not convinced that that's a good reason to shut up the entire half of Western society. And so, look, there's never any good, perfect answers. We have to admit that. We're just in a very bad answer right now, and a very dangerous one, and a very Stalinist direction right now. If you study the 20th century, it's riddled with once free societies embracing authoritarian tyrants to shut up people they disagree with. And usually it's done through government. The difference right now, it's done through private companies. And what's different about this, and you mentioned this earlier, who's more powerful right now? The 100 people that work at Google right now, or the 100 people at the IRS? Now, some people would traditionally say in the conservative circles, 100 people at the IRS, for sure. Maybe. But do you know what the difference at the IRS is? I can hire an attorney. I can cross-examine them. I could bring them in front of a judge and maybe a jury of my peers and show that the IRS is unfairly targeting me. I can sue them back and I can win. It's hard. It's expensive. I can't do that with Google. In fact, it's proven to be futile. I can't win because they just hide behind the Communications 230 Decency Act, as I mentioned earlier. So I actually think they're more powerful. The IRS can't topple a government. The IRS doesn't even know where I am right now. Google knows exactly where I am. They claim they don't abuse it and look at it. Nonsense, rubbish. That's foolishness. Edward Snowden showed us that people that have the power to abuse it will abuse it. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Edward Snowden for other reasons, but that's a different conversation for a different time. I think there's good and bad that come out of all things. I think Edward Snowden was more of a societal teacher more than anything else, despite I'm not a big believer in leaking private information that is given through NSA. But to close the point, I'll say this. We have to look at where the power is. And we, as people that are skeptical of power, read the Federalist Papers, read Jefferson, read Locke. They hated centralized power. If we hate centralized power, then we shouldn't love a company that's more powerful than our government. Isn't that a logical way to explain it? And just because they're technically an LLC or they're technically a publicly traded company doesn't make them good. And this is a philosophical divergence sometimes in the conservative movement, where all of a sudden we've looked as government automatically bad, private company automatically good. That's generally true. I think that's generally a true rule, but there's exceptions. And I think this is the broad exception, especially when these companies are staffed with the worst elements of American society. Anti-American Marxists that are trained by university professors that want to topple us from within, that have a deconstructionist anti-Western philosophy, that are committed to taking us down at all costs. I'm not willing to do nothing.